This is Maidan Незалежності, or Ukraine's Independence Square in downtown Kyiv. In 2013-2014, this place became a stage for the pro-Western EuroMaidan Revolution. It started 10 years ago and became one of the turning points in Ukraine's history when the Ukrainian people made a clear decision. They wanted their country to become a full-fledged democracy and a member of the EU. In November 2013, pro-Kremlin President Viktor Yanukovych refused to sign the long-awaited EU association agreement.
Outraged by this decision, hundreds of people gathered on Independence Square that evening for a peaceful protest.
In the following days, the number of demonstrators swelled to hundreds of thousands of people. Similar protests also occurred in other cities, including Lviv, Odessa, Mykolaiv, and Donetsk. Many of the protesters were young people, including students who went on a strike and refused to attend classes.
At around 4 a.m. on the 30th of November, when a couple of hundred people, mostly students, stayed for the night on Maidan, the Ukrainian riot police barricaded and encircled the protesters. Using excessive violence, Berkut forced the people out of the square, beating them up with batons and kicking those who fell down. In the morning, Ukrainians saw shocking footage of the brutal attack. They took to the streets to demand punishment for those responsible for beating the protesters. On the 8th of December, a millions march took place in central Kyiv, with around 1 million people demanding the resignation of Mykola Azar's government. Protests continued all across Ukraine. The protesters eventually built barricades, used Molotov cocktails, burned tires, and threw paving stones at law enforcement. On the 22nd of January, the first two protesters from the Heavenly Hundred, Sergei Nihoyan and Mikhailo Zhizhnevsky, were killed by a sniper. A month later, the violence in Kyiv intensified significantly as law enforcement fired at unarmed protesters, killing nearly 100 of them. Eventually, the lawmakers, including those from Yanukovych's party of regions, voted to condemn the attack. The next day, protesters demanded Yanukovych's resignation. He soon fled Ukraine, and his luxurious residence outside Kyiv was opened to the public. On the 22nd of February, the parliament ousted Yanukovych from office. By that point, his pro-Kremlin government had collapsed.
This was a historical moment that showed that ties with the past, with imperialism, with Russia, both commercial and mental, are broken. Now we have a long way to go, but it is now finally in the right direction.
This was the moment when our people realized it was time to fight, to do something, change something. And of course, there was resistance to these changes.
We see that Ukraine is indeed an independent state. This is probably, among other things, due to the events of that horrible year.
In the following years, Ukraine signed an association agreement with the EU and received a visa-free travel regime from the bloc. In 2022, during Russia's full-scale war in a historic turn, Ukraine received a candidate status from the EU. The uprising laid the foundation of the development of the strong civil society in Ukraine and ignited a cultural renaissance in Ukraine as Ukrainians started learning more about their history and culture. Meanwhile, Russia, which lost its influence over the Ukrainian government, started the war against Ukraine. It occupied Crimea and parts of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. In 2022, it started a full-scale war against Ukraine, and it is still bombing civilians.